Oh, it looks like we're broadcasting. So you are listening to Misery to fucking it. Well, you know what?
We have to
AJ can
restart
cut
now.
anything off of the beginning of the podcast.
Oh,
And AJ, if I listen to this and I hear this, I'm gonna know you didn't edit the podcast.
oh.
Okay. Hey, you're listening to MiseryTourism.com's Misery Movies podcast. And this week we are going to be discussing Darren Aronofsky's film. I think I got that right. Mother. This is the second film we are going to be discussing in our 2018 Halloween movie marathon. We did this last year. It was a huge success in that we were able to continue to do it. And not in the sense of like we got any listeners or anything off of it. But so anyway, I'm Will, and this episode I am joined by Misery Tourism co-founder Rudy.
Hey.
Who's currently presenting as an anthropomorphic witch girl. Well, I guess not anthropomorphic, as an anime witch girl. I mean, I guess your anthropomorphic would assume that she wasn't all human, although she certainly doesn't look all human. Anyway, also joining us is Misery Tourism contributor Sarah.
Hey guys.
And Misery Tourism resident horror movie expert. I don't fucking know. I'm creating a fictional title for you. Brandon.
I deal mostly in fictional titles, so that works.
So, yeah. So usually we structure these podcasts in a kind of bifurcated way, in that we usually have the first half of the podcast where we discuss the movie in a totally spoiler-free way, and then the second half of the podcast where we do a deeper dive into the film and cover specific scenes and plot twists and stuff, and generally that half is full of spoilers. We're going to do something a little bit different this week. So in discussing this film before we started the podcast, we realized that essentially every moment of this podcast, starting with every moment of this film, starting with literally the first scene, is a potential spoiler. So that said, if you haven't seen the movie, maybe go watch the movie before you start the podcast, because we are going to kick right into the spoiler section off the bat. And for this discussion, anything goes. So if you really want to see Mother, which I recommend,
absolutely,
and you don't want to be spoiled, which I also recommend given the kind of movie it is, just go watch it, come back, listen to the podcast. Or don't listen to the podcast. Listen, we're not getting paid for this. But if you do want to listen to the podcast, watch the movie, come back. If you've already seen the movie, great. Stick around. All right, so Brandon, this was your pick for this year's Halloween movie marathon.
I had to redeem myself for last year.
Now, Brandon, I thought that incredibly amateurish basement RPG horror film or whatever it was okay, I was going to say a masterpiece, but that's not true.
Yeah,
but you know what it was? You know what it absolutely was, Brandon?
What was that?
It was better than Sarah's choice last year, which she did not even show up on the podcast to fucking discuss with us.
Wait, what was my choice? I totally forgot.
You made us watch Zombieverse.
Oh, hell yeah. The
You
best
did.
movie ever.
She did.
You did.
I didn't watch it. So. Hey.
You may not get a choice this year because there's a little bit of like, we no longer trust you.
Oh, come on. Are you saying you did not enjoy Zombievers?
Not only because you picked
I'll
such
be
a
back.
bad movie, but because you didn't show up to discuss it
I
with us
was
so that we
sick.
could.
Well, I was very sick.
Okay, that's true.
So were we after watching that movie.
Hey, that was a brilliant film. They knew exactly what they were doing.
They
The sad thing is, I'm sure they did.
Yeah, they did.
yeah, they did.
Yeah.
So, Brandon, okay, you're on the hot seat
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
What the hell is this?
Mother
What
is
this movie?
Mother is a very, very interesting psychological / supernatural thriller, in my opinion.
Mm.
And my opinion is more on the slash rather than just saying one or the other, because
Mhm.
really, it's almost two movies in one in terms of
Okay.
tone. It starts off deeply psychological. It's almost claustrophobic in a lot of ways, I think. And then it becomes something else entirely, and it's just spectacular to watch it unfold as it transitions from being a normal home invasion movie into this brilliantly executed allegory.
Yes. But just in case our listeners didn't actually listen to us, in case they didn't watch the movie,
Yes.
can you just very quickly, what's the premise of the film?
Okay, so the premise is, of course, starring two fantastic actors,
Yeah.
Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem as the principal married couple restoring an old home that are visited upon one evening by a traveling surgeon played by Ed Harris,
Mm.
who winds up just leading into all sorts of mischief and mayhem. Later visited upon by his wife, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. Again, cannot stress enough the outstanding cast that they had for this movie.
Yes.
Which leads to the sons showing up, more havoc. The families showing up, more havoc. Then all sorts of shit goes down.
Mm.
She winds
It
up
does.
conceiving a child. There is
Yeah,
yet
we don't
another
need to-
home on.
We don't need to necessarily go into that.
Yeah.
just yet. But
Yeah.
you're. I mean, the premise of this movie.
It's hard to summarize because there is so much that goes on in such a short amount of time.
Yes, yeah, and by design, right?
Yeah.
But you've
And
all
yet
heard,
it doesn't feel rushed.
right? You've all heard the nursery rhyme. You know, there once was an old lady who swallowed a fly, right? Or
Yes.
one of my personal favorite children's stories. If you gave a mouse a cookie, this is in some ways
Yes.
like
Yes.
that, in that you have this kind of snowballing series of events where one small act of like empathy or kindness or generosity
Yeah.
snowballs out of control into this absolutely catastrophic series of events where
It's like putting Russian nesting dolls back inside each other.
yes, yeah, where she ends up swallowing the spider to catch the fly, or in this case, Ed Harris, you would let Ed Harris into the house, and his wife shows up, and as you said, soon his whole family's there, and then soon all of humanity is there, right?
Yeah. And all hell breaks loose.
Literally.
Yes.
I like that you used the phrase home invasion, Brandon, because I actually wrote that down in my notes while I was watching this.
Oh, yeah.
For me, this movie, it wasn't scary, but it was very anxiety inducing because I just kept wanting her to kill somebody because I knew it was gonna spiral out of control as soon as he showed up, and you could see it was going to get a little crazy. And then Michelle Pfeiffer showed up as the wife. I'm like, oh goddamn, no. So it was definitely for me, for like the first half of this film, it was about a very kind of subtle home invasion where they're not breaking in. They have been invited, but not by you. And it was just very stressful because you could see her stress, but she's not exactly discussing it, and it's not being. He doesn't really legitimize it. He doesn't think it is anything to worry about. So for me, that was the horrific part of this movie, which is that he just did not care at all
absolutely
what she was going through, and that these people were being disrespectful and destroying things, and these horrible things were happening. So it was a very interesting watch.
Almost that moment of, oh no, nothing weird is going on. You're crazy. You're going crazy. It's all in your head.
Right. Yeah, the home invasion angle is interesting, and not something that I really thought about that much before we started listening, but there's actually a whole kind of like genre or subgenre of horror film, right? That's like the home invasion horror film, or the unwanted guest horror film, horror film,
absolutely.
going all the way back to, you know, whether or not you want to call this a horror movie or not, Bergman's masterpiece, The Virgin Spring, right? Which was then, Brandon, you'll probably know this, sort of remade as an honest-to-goodness horror film as The Last House on the Left.
Yes.
Which was then remade again as The Last House on the Left. But I mean, there are so many movies that, especially horror movies, that rest upon this idea of either, like, you pick up a hitchhiker, right? Or you let someone into your home, even willingly. I mean, even we were watching a vampire. Stranger Danger, yeah. But I mean, that's also the cusp of like a lot of vampire films too, right? Since we watched the vampire movie last week, like the idea that you have to invite them in, but once they've been invited in, they're gonna fuck you up. And so that angle, like, on this, I think is really, really interesting, and like gives me a segue to ask you, Brandon, a point blank question. Although Sarah and Rudy can certainly feel free to jump in on this if they want. Now, here's the thing, Brandon. This is a Halloween movie marathon.
Yes.
Do you consider this a horror movie?
I would definitely consider this a horror movie. Personally, my criteria for what makes a great horror film are: does it instigate an emotional response? Does it reflect some aspect of human nature that is toward the darker side, toward the less savory? Does it have some element of not only reality, but also something that you don't quite feel would happen, even if it's something that is entirely possible? And as far as the twist goes, nothing in the world is scarier to me than religion.
So you, and that reminds me, Brandon, I am so happy that you opted for this movie instead of like Red State or something.
Yeah.
Because I was dreading that you were going to like make me watch it. But instead, you actually picked a movie that I've seen before and that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Rudy, let me get you in on this one. Do you think this is a horror movie?
I absolutely think it is a horror movie, complete with jump scares every time the camera jerks around a corner or does something different.
Yeah.
I think it was definitely some kind of interesting stuff going on there.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
All right. I'm going to be the odd one out this time. It was a very interesting film, but for me, it was not horror. Because again, I didn't find it scary, but I did find it very stressful. Because I do not like people being in my home. And the fact that all these people were invading her home and the thing that she took pride and joy in, I was super anxious. I was feeling very violent emotions. I was like, bitch, just stab everybody in the neck or shoot everybody. I don't care. Just get them out of your house. Bury them in the basement. But for me, this wasn't strictly horror. I can see where it will slide into that category, though. But it definitely evoked a lot of strong emotions for me personally, which is, I like that, because I've watched like films that are categorized as horror strictly, and they have not evoked any emotion whatsoever, except maybe boredom. So I really appreciated that about this film.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I going to admit, when I watched this movie for the first time a few months ago, it would never have occurred to me to categorize this as a horror film. But watching it again now, in this context, like what Rudy brought up about the camera work, like really caught me this time around. Like the first time I watched it, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of like a allegorical film. This is a film about psychological stress, like Sarah was saying, but I wouldn't have said, oh yeah, that's a horror film. But watching it now, just like Rudy said, there are literal jump scares in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, in fact, in the
executed jump scares.
Yeah. Not really the first scene in the movie, but very, very near the beginning of the movie is a jump scare.
Oh yeah.
When she first encounters her husband.
Yeah.
Right? When he comes up behind her. And that was it's a very cliched kind of jump scare too. But so that, like, the camera work, as I said, makes me think of a horror movie. But also, there's something almost like, and it isn't in and of itself kind of a cliche, but there's something almost Hitchcockian kind of about the construction of this film and the way tension escalates in this film.
Yeah.
And certainly, also, this film has the supernatural elements you would expect from a horror film, and even the whole idea of like a living house is something that's been explored by horror before, although it's certainly handled in a different way here. And there are some like legitimately gross little pieces of special effects work here too, like you would expect in a horror film. Two in particular are really
yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean,
I feel like this entire movie should have a trigger warning on it.
Yeah, basically.
Because there are so many elements of it that if anyone has any form of PTSD, this movie can hit almost every single one.
I was just thinking of that too, PTSD. I mean, maybe, and we might all have different triggers for this too. We might not have the same one. Yeah. For me, honestly, it really was like the people coming into the house.
Yeah.
Like the scene where you have the people on the sink, and she said, "Hey, get off of that! It's not braced." And they keep getting on it, and they totally break it, and they break the pipes. I'm like, I'm going crazy, and I'm literally just sitting on the couch, and I'm just like, no, I can't watch this anymore. It's too much. That was my trigger.
It was jarring. I mean, some parts of it were just jarring.
Oh god.
Yes. And I'm sure for the scene with the baby, I mean, I'm sure that was very triggering.
So many people would have such a hard time watching that scene. So anyone who hasn't watched the movie yet, there's a scene you may want to skip.
Just skip the last like half an hour.
If you like babies, you probably don't want to see that part.
Listen, though, I'm going to be totally frank and upfront and honest here. That scene you were describing with the sink was so much more upsetting to me than watching that baby get dismembered.
Same here.
Me too. I'm a horrible person, but that was so much worse to me because it was so deliberate with the characters. They were so deliberately
and
trying
that's the
to
thing,
upset
though,
her.
too.
Yeah.
This is where I love that, because if you look at the tradition of cinema, we are desensitized to blood and gore and violence.
Yes.
Even in a situation like that where it is definitely done in the extreme,
Right.
we are so desensitized and so used to seeing blood and gore that, yeah, some of us are going to have a reaction to that. We're not desensitized to someone ignoring when we say, please don't sit on that.
Yeah.
It's not braced.
Exactly.
Please
Yeah.
don't
No.
do that. Please don't do that. You just fucking broke it. You just broke all of the pipes in our kitchen. Our kitchen is now flooding. What's wrong with you assholes? What are you doing? Why are you in my house?
Yeah.
And not only that, but they don't give a shit. They don't care. They don't help you. They're just sniggering. Like, I would murder everybody in that house, including the husband, because I hate him so much. Everybody would die, and I would just be a single mother. I mean, no.
This film is a dystopian dream. It really
this movie felt extreme. It felt so exaggerated.
Yeah.
Sarah, you were saying that you would literally murder God. That's
I
what I'm
would
hearing.
Murder God. Well, I'm an atheist anyway, so he doesn't exist. I would fucking murder him for letting all that shit happen, and I feel that way about what he's done to the world. So yes, I would murder.
Well, and that's
honestly, the first half of this movie was so disturbing to me that the second half was like a breeze. Like when I saw them like breaking into the house and the police and shit.
Well, that's just it.
The part with him eating the baby. I mean, that was all downhill from there. You know, for me.
You get to the point where this is what we're used to.
Right.
Yeah.
I can really process this.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, now that you say that, I actually I agree with you, Rudy. And in fact, it is notable that this film is broken up into two discrete chunks, right? And for me, that first chunk, for the most part, is a lot more unnerving and upsetting than the second chunk. The second chunk is actually, parts of it are really incredibly inventive.
Yeah.
And, like, it's a rush to watch that part of the film and to watch like the way the house is transformed into a literal war zone, complete with like hooded executions and like detainment areas, and like that is just like thrilling. But it is thrilling, which is so different from the first part of the film, which to be thrilled and even to some degree to be horrified is a positive emotion. And I know that sounds fucked up.
No, absolutely.
It gives you a kind of adrenaline kick, right? And that's what most horror films live off of, that kind of adrenaline kick that comes from a jump scare, or that comes from watching this really ungodly series of events unfold and not knowing where it's going to go.
Yep.
The first half of the film does not offer you that kind of adrenal escape.
I was going to say that.
It's the absolute just most like it's the grind of having like the anxiety grind of having to encounter other human beings who are innately obnoxious and having to tolerate them. And the fact that this film dares to do that, dares to give maybe more of its running time to that is I say bravo to that.
Absolutely.
Films today, especially in a market that's flooded with fucking films that are designed to make people feel good or to make people feel bad in that kind of adrenal way, like
fuck you, Conjuring.
But I mean,
fuck that whole series.
Hey, I love that series, Brandon. Fuck you.
Now we're getting somewhere. But no, I mean, so many movies are designed to give you like positive emotions or positive emotions
feedback
masquerading as negative emotions, right? To get your heart racing and to get you engaged. To have a movie that doubles down so completely on making the audience feel anxious and shitty and uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable is a
like
good word for
I
this.
love that.
And in a way that ramped up consistently.
Yeah.
That was the best part for me. It was just that constant build and build and build and a crescendo until it's just this explosion.
Literal.
Yeah.
Literally an explosion.
Yeah.
Literally.
Like
it really
the house
was
fucking blows up.
Yeah.
The first half of this movie was oppression, and then the rest of it was the release of it. It was so violent.
Right.
Release. You couldn't help but feel it, and you knew it was coming too the whole time. You knew you were gonna get this violent action coming at you. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Let me ask you guys this. Do you think there's a reason why this film is very clearly separated into two distinct acts with a time jump in between? Think about it. This film is almost vaguely, it's not exactly real time-ish because they go to bed and they get up, but the first chunk of time is very clearly like flows from point A to point B and then stops. And then there's a time jump of about, I suppose, 8 to 9 months. And then there's another period that is basically an uninterrupted flow of time. Does anyone want to tell me why that might be?
I'll chime in on what my opinion is. Of course, you guys are free to agree or disagree. But my interpretation, sticking with the allegory that we're building on, of this is God and the house is kind of the world in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the earth.
Yeah.
And
creation.
Exactly. That's kind of what I took away from it, is that first act, or first two acts, really, because I look at it as the minute the family shows up, that's almost an act in and of itself. Is you have the start of creation where the house is restored in that first opening second scene, which is one, you get started by that jolt of the woman burning and the generation of the first crystal heart. And then it cuts to the house being restored to life and this vibrant color, not quite all together, but the structures are there. The furnishing is there. It just needs to be filled out. It needs to be worked on. And then you have the work of God and the mother actually bringing that house to life even further. Then you have the introduction of the catalyst that starts the entire downfall, which in a lot of ways you could look at as the fall of the angels. And that just leads to worse and worse until ultimately humanity rips apart God's creation. Just everyone wants a piece of it. Everyone wants to latch on and take away what they can from it, leading to its ultimate eventual destruction.
Yes, I think you're definitely right on the biblical. Like, you're going in the same direction as I am, I think, in terms of it relating to the biblical allegory here. Sarah, Rudy, do you want to jump in on this?
Actually, what you said about everyone wanting a piece of this. Well, I was talking before the podcast, I was talking about my boyfriend Jerome and how I watched maybe an hour or so of this before he came home. And he came home and he was kind of in and out of the room watching it. But he actually had a few opinions. But he actually mentioned how, everybody wants a piece of the baby. The baby is Jesus, right?
Oh yeah. And I mean, that much is...
Everybody wants a piece of it. And I'm like, that's a really good point, actually. And
my body and blood, right?
Exactly. And I didn't quite catch on to that right away. It took me a little bit, because I was just so like, what the fuck is happening in this movie right now? Like with the scene with the baby, which is obviously, it is very disturbing. But I didn't understand what was happening right away. I knew something obviously horrendous was happening. But then they showed the scene where she's like, my baby's dead, and all that. And then Jerome said, everybody wants a piece of Jesus, and they're, it was very symbolic.
That scene is a literal communion scene, right?
Literal.
Absolutely.
The literal body of the baby is dismembered and eaten. It's not bread and wine masquerading as the body and blood.
After being literally handed over to them by God.
To the mob.
It was literal. It was
that was very direct. Rudy, do you want to get in on this?
I mean, I pretty much agree with everything that's been said already. I guess you could look at it outside of the biblical allegory thing as like artistic creation and destruction in some ways. And the first half is, I mean, they even talk about his, his will to write and that kind of thing being kind of built on and kind of, I guess, rejuvenated by the events that happened in the first, life or whatever happening in the first parts of it. And then in the second half, it's all destroyed and everything. It's that the first half is very much about creation, I guess, and the second half is about destruction.
Exactly.
That's true.
What's getting created and destroyed? I mean, you can go the allegory route, or you can, look at it as more like an artistic thing. But it's pretty much.
And that, to me, is what made it work so well, is that it was a multi-leveled concept. It wasn't just a flat, we're just going to tell you the story of the Bible in a traumatizing, anxiety-inducing way. It was, we're going to present these characters as fleshed out human beings. And we're going to make them somewhat relatable. Like, these are archetypes of people that you can actually recognize.
Yeah.
And that humanization is just fantastic.
I really agree with that. But I think if you want to view this movie in an allegorical way, you can really see like three different allegories operating here. One is the really like transparently obvious one, which is like, this is a biblical allegory, right? Two is what Rudy's talking about, which is that this is an allegory for the creative process in some way. And also, by the way, I think it's fair. Like, a lot of times people throw the word allegory or symbolism or shit around when talking about films, and a lot of times they're talking out their ass. And the movies are, and they're actually insulting the film by calling it allegorical. But this is unequivocally, I think, an allegorical film. Like, but anyway, and three, I think that this is a kind of environmentalist. Mother Nature allegory, right?
Absolutely.
And we can maybe talk about those three things a little bit, but getting back to the 2-act structure here, I mean, it's Old Testament, New Testament, right?
Yeah.
The first act even ends with him writing his book, right? The first act is creation, Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Adam arrives and Eve arrives. They eat the forbidden fruit, or in this case, they go into his forbidden study and drop that ball of glass, the glass heart is the forbidden fruit. Then their children, Cain and Abel, show up. Cain kills Abel. There's a falling out, and then there's chaos. There's like that. There's original sin in there. In that there's that stain in the floorboards that she can't get out, and on and on and on. And it ends, and then finally, when the chaos is over and the house is cleared, he gets the inspiration to write a book, like the first book, right? The Old Testament. And B, they conceive a child. And then
miraculously in one try.
In one try, and she's suddenly aware that she has conceived. Right? She's supernaturally aware that she's conceived, even. And
she literally wakes him up the next day and says, "I'm pregnant."
And then the second act,
because that's how that works, right?
Right. Well, but that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, that's the supernatural element there. That's a little bit of immaculate conception. The idea that like God fucks her, and she knows immediately that she's been fucked by God and she's gonna have a baby. And then Act 2 is all about the brief life of God's child, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And then you get straight into fucking Revelations.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That
And
poor baby.
that like the birth of the child, it's very short life. It's murder and dismemberment at the hand of a bunch of religious zealots who think they're serving God. And then there's the Last Supper communion scene, which is really like fucked up. And then there's this moment where it's like, but you know what? This sacrifice is meaningful. Like,
oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, don't worry, Jesus died for our sins. And she says, fuck no.
I wanted to slap someone so hard during that scene, by the way. There's a reason for this. There's a reason he died. And she's just like, but what? No, I'm his mom. No. And then he's like, I need one more thing from you. I'm like, dude, stop it. You took everything from her so far and you want one more thing? Are you kidding me? No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and in keeping with that, I thought it was brilliant how Mother, since they never actually gave her a name.
That's true.
And
is not only an allegory for Mary, being that she is the mother of the Christ figure in the movie, but she's also an analogy for Mother Earth.
Well, and that's the big one, yeah.
And how the ultimate sacrifice of Mother Earth is what ends the madness for the time being.
Right. And let's get back to
the that reset button
in just a second, because I do want to talk about that. I think we could have a whole discussion about that. But I want to hang.
This is why we didn't do a non-spoiler section, guys.
But I do want to hang with like the biblical allegory thing for just a little while longer, because one moment that I really love is after her baby is dismembered and eaten by the mob. There's this moment where it's like this kind of faux resurrection, which I think they handled really well, where, you know, in the Bible, it's like, oh yeah, Jesus rises from the dead. Now he's with us. And they even say, oh yeah, but don't worry, your baby hasn't really died. He's with all of us. And then they start doing this really fake imitation of the baby's cries. And it's just so pitch perfect, because you don't believe it for a fucking minute. Right? You're like, no, they killed the fucking baby and they ate it. Right? And now this is like, this whole thing is like performative, right? It's just, it's bullshit. It's a rationalization of the death. And that imitation of the baby's cry is not the same thing as the baby crying. But also you're seeing all of this through Mother's very fixed, specific lens. And that's one thing about this movie, is it is very much tied to a single perspective. The movie follows Jennifer Lawrence's character.
Agree. That's part of the reason it was so dramatic, because you're watching it from the mother's point of view. First, it's the wife's point of view. This young mother to be. She knows she wants to have kids, but right now it's not happening. She's got this older husband who kind of controls everything. And then she finally does get pregnant. It's amazing for 9 months. And then all of a sudden she loses all control. And she has this little precious gem to protect. And she can't. And that was, it was very, very well written in that way. It was.
And following not only the perspective, but that's a great word, because the third person perspective used in the camera tracking in this film was by far one of the most gripping and anxiety inducing parts.
Yeah.
It really, I love the camera work on this.
Oh God.
I really do.
Yeah.
It was definitely anxiety. I wrote that down like 2 or 3 times in my notes for this movie, because it was so anxiety inducing. It was so effective in that way. And I think it was very purposefully done as well. And I think I very much appreciate that, actually.
I mean, it's claustrophobic,
It
right? I
is.
mean, the camera,
Yeah.
except for a few very brief exceptions, the camera almost literally never leaves Jennifer Lawrence's side.
Yeah.
Well, and even when it does leave her side, it's still from her perspective.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never really see anything that she doesn't see.
Yeah. And I mean, there are a few shots where it's literally a first-person camera, right? Where she'll look. A lot of times, it's her looking down at herself, which are kind of interesting shots.
Or touching the wall, and you see what she sees.
Right.
Like the pulse of the house, the lifeblood of the house.
Mm.
You know, the perfect which is again a great metaphor for the living world itself.
Yeah.
I will say though, that's one visual effect shot that I wish had been cut from the movie.
I would agree.
I really didn't like the scenes where she puts her hand on the wall and you see this like pulsating heart, and it's like, oh
the
yeah,
CGI
that's like
was
the soul
unnecessary.
of the house, and the house.
The CGI was definitely unnecessary.
Yeah, exactly. There was no real point to it.
Yeah, I mean, so often one of the things that makes this movie work in a way that a lot of similar like living house movies don't is it is shot like there's very little in the way of like special effects. It's a very naturalistic looking environment. And the subversions of that are the moments when it breaks and you start to see that there's something subtly supernatural here, mostly work. Like when she's unclogging the toilet and that thing pops out, that thing that looks like an organ of some kind, right?
Oh God.
And that was really fucked up, and that really was really disturbing, and that worked. But the moments with the literal heart of the house that corresponds to her house, that was heavy-handed as shit, and really was not necessary to communicate what the movie was trying to communicate.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely.
And there were a lot of other like small moments where the movie went too far with the biblical allegory stuff. Like where the dialogue was like obvious. Like there's one time where she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go get started on the apocalypse," and like she's referring to the mess in the house, but it's like eye-rollingly obvious. Like there were just moments like that when it's like this thing is working.
Where
just
they lost
fine.
the subtlety.
Yeah. I mean, and it wasn't even subtle to begin with, and it was working just fine the way you structured it. You really don't need to wink and nod at it because you're already like it's right there for everyone to see, you know. But yeah. Anything else on the like biblical allegory component of this?
Oh boy, there's so much. There really is just so much. I mean, you look at the Cain and Abel connection, where it's really the death of one of the brothers that kind of sparks everything really falling apart. I mean, of course, the breaking of the first glass heart is the moment of original sin. Well, that would be the moment of the first death.
Yeah.
And that is what really brought death and destruction into the world. And I thought that was very well executed, because not only did it represent the first death, but it did bring about the destruction, because that was what led to all of the family members showing up, and then all of the family friends showing up, and then all the acquaintances and all of the other people, and just piling on and on and on and on and on. And that was I liked the way that it connected not only murder, but into all other tragedy that would then befall the world.
Yeah, you get that sense of like escalation there. One thing where you're talking about Cain and Abel, the movie weaves in like a lot of times the biblical allusions are really obvious and heavy-handed. But there are a few moments where it will weave in something like really small, and you're like, oh, hey, like,
oh yeah,
like the way the mark. Did you realize that? Like, did you catch that? Like, the mark of Cain actually makes an appearance in the film,
yes,
because after Cain, in this case, the brother, like, finishes bludgeoning Abel to death, the Javier Bardem's character, who's God, grabs him and slams Cain against the mantle, and he gets this little mark on his forehead that is still there after he's cast out into the wilderness and he comes back. That was a cute little moment where it's like like in the Bible, Cain is marked by God for his sin, and here
it's that little nod to something that might be a little more obscure to people that haven't really read the original biblical stories or haven't really been exposed to them.
And it also provides a nice little emotional subversion or twist on those moments, because in the Bible, of course, it's this really deliberate choice on God's part. He's like, you've killed your brother, you're going to be cast out into the wilderness, and you're going to be marked. You know, it's like God is the judge, God making a very deliberate decision.
Oh, absolutely.
Whereas in this movie, it happens accidentally. Like, he's just trying to get him off his brother, and he throws him there, and he's marked, and he's like, get the fuck out of here. You know, and that's him being cast out into the wilderness.
It humanized the moment.
But that strain runs through the whole movie, where God ceases to be this kind of dispassionate, judging figure, and instead you have a consistently very human God, but a consistently also, like, oddly both very self-absorbed and also very empathetic and caring God. And yet, and this is where I think one of the moments where the movie, this is, I think, one of the moments where the movie delivers more than just a straight up or down kind of like either like satire of the Bible or biblical allegory or whatever, is the fact that God's empathy in this film is actually one of his worst fucking traits.
Absolutely.
He barely has any empathy, really, for his wife or his son. It's nothing. It's for everybody else.
Yeah. God's forgiveness in this film is a vice.
It's a weakness.
And that's the thing. And if you really look at Old Testament versus New Testament, since that's a great way to describe the division. In the Old Testament, you see that more passionate God, that more reactionary God, that is more concerned with trying to direct order and, you know, wanting to give humanity free will, but at the same time, these are things that you cannot do. And then the New Testament hits, and it's all, no, they're forgiven. They're forgiven. As long as they're sorry about it, they can just reach heaven. They're fine.
This is why I'm an atheist.
But it is interesting because I think the movie could have gone another way, which is that it could have opted to make Javier. It could have opted to make the God figure in this film entirely self-absorbed and egotistical, right? There's you could make just a few small tweaks to this movie and end up with a God who's actually only completely interested in himself. He's interested in having his work acknowledged and praised, and humanity is just an avenue, just an outlet, just an opportunity to get that praise, to get that acknowledgement that he wants. And the movie plays with that idea, but it doesn't commit to it 100%. Instead, you get multiple moments where you really see a compassionate God, but God's compassion for humanity fucks everything up.
Fucks everybody.
A truly stern and unforgiving Old Testament God would have set shit straight in this movie.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I, on that same note, I really have to say, of all of the actors that they could have brought in to portray a god figure, Javier Bardem would not have been one that I would have thought of immediately to put on that short list. But god damn,
Yeah.
what a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just think
There-
of
I
No
can't
Country
think
for
of-
Old Men.
Oh yeah,
You know, really, like, he's amazing. He can play
he
evil
is.
and good
He
in
is
both.
an incredible actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this has come up a couple of times, so you might as well talk about it a little bit. As I think Sarah and Brandon, you've both said, like, the casting in this film is incredible.
Mhm.
And I would
Mhm.
go so far as to say this movie potentially does not work at all with a different, less talented cast.
I would agree
And I know
completely.
that's
I agree
true
too.
of a lot of movies, but I think it's doubly true of this movie. There's an alternate version of this film that isn't that has the same screenplay but isn't directed by Darren Aronofsky, who has the clout to get literally anyone he wants in his movies, right? It's some film school student or something, or some indie director who writes this and somehow manages to get it made, but he can't get Ed Harris in the movie. He can't get Michelle Pfeiffer in the movie. He definitely can't get Jennifer Lawrence at the height of her career in this movie.
Well, they were fucking, by the way.
Well, there you go.
Well, that makes everything easier.
Yeah.
But there you have it, right? It doesn't have those connections, in any sense, and has to use a B tier cast. And I think with a B tier cast, or even an A tier cast that isn't just as fucking exceptional. I mean, think about this. He gets Ed Harris in here for what's essentially a 10-minute, not quite cameo appearance, but it's a relatively small role.
Oh yeah.
But he gets Ed Harris to bring his gravity to a relatively small role in this film.
It's a short but memorable role, though. And the same is with Michelle Pfeiffer and the people who play the sons. They're very short, but you remember them until the end of the movie because they are so significant and they are so powerful in their significance. Absolutely.
But if you have a director who doesn't have that kind of clout, I think this film starts looking a lot more threadbare. I think it starts like really fucking heavy-handed.
This film would not have been backed by a major studio without a director with that kind of clout.
Right.
Absolutely.
But even if it was, let's say it was, I mean, even so, I mean, it's not like you need a huge budget to make this movie.
No.
This movie was not on a huge budget. Give the movie the same budget, give it everything else, but take away its cast, and I think it falls flat on its face.
I would agree.
I think it starts to seem like really heavy-handed, and I think it starts like the allegory overpowers everything else. It's the subtlety in the performances, and especially in Lawrence and Bardem's performances.
Oh yeah,
right.
Oh yeah. To put so much weight of a movie, of an entire film, and if I'm not mistaken, this clocked in around the 2-hour mark.
Yeah, just about.
Yep.
To put so much weight on a movie of that length on the shoulders of two actors, that is one of the biggest risks in filmmaking possible.
Yeah.
To put that much faith in your two lead actors is really extraordinary in and of itself. And the choices that were made to use Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem were just absolute strokes of brilliance.
Yeah. And in Lawrence's case, in particular, here you have a relatively young actress too, who has to carry like 80% of this movie,
and largely untested in that kind of role.
Yeah.
Now she's been a lead before, obviously, but we're talking like The Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Which was a film that was more carried on the success of the novels and on appealing to a younger adult audience.
She did have Winter's Bones before that.
She did,
though,
yeah, absolutely. And Silver Linings Playbook, and she's been a lead in other movies.
She's never done something quite like this.
Exactly, nothing with this level of gravitas.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, to what Sarah was saying, and to Jennifer Lawrence's credit, Winter's Bone rests very, very heavily on her performance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a similarly sort of small budget film, and she was even younger then, and that was sort of her breakout performance. Carried that motherfucker. So it's not at all surprising that she's able to carry this film to that degree. But if, like, Aronofsky couldn't have cast Jennifer Lawrence in that role, is there another 20-something actress who could have done it, who would have been, like, even, I don't know, probably, I mean, sure, of course there is, but there aren't many.
I'm sure there are, but it's hard to come up with a name.
It's hard to imagine someone else doing it. I'm sure they could have come up with somebody else. But I feel like she was kind of made for that role. She is actually very diverse, whatever you think about her.
She is.
Everything I've seen her in, even if the movie itself isn't very good, she herself is very good.
And
even in the Red Sparrow, which was mediocre. She was very good in that. It's just not the best film, but it was entertaining, and she did her part. And I feel the same way about this. She always gives her 100% to everything that she's in.
And in my opinion, there's something too in her appearance. And I'm not going to try to make this some shallow statement. What I mean by her appearance, I mean that there is an element of almost innocence that is just inherent to the way that she looks. She seems like there's just something in the smoothness of her face. It's a very soft, innocent, relatable, endearing quality, and I think without that, the character would lose a lot of the sympathetic qualities that really makes it work.
I agree with that.
Brandon, you saying that makes me want to see a movie where Lawrence plays a really diabolical and hateful villain.
Oh God, yeah.
Like, I just want to.
I would be all over that. I would be all over that.
But I think you're right. She is certainly physically right for the role. Javier Bardem is physically right for the role in a way that, as you guys said, you wouldn't expect. But he has exactly that. Like, he has an oddly, like, a really particular appearance that's both like simultaneously like earthy but also like abstracted. Like, I don't even know. If you need to cast God, you need God to be like the creator of Earth, like the creator of everything and part of that, but also like divorced from that and absent and above it. Like, I can't think of many actors who would have been able to do that.
He, in my opinion, he had this amazing ability in this movie to, at the same time, be sympathetic and be completely loathsome. And I mean, in like delivering the same sentence. He has this way of delivering the lines where it's like, oh, this is this suave Spaniard that is just so thoughtful and intelligent and thought-provoking. And yet he's saying the most asshole-ish thing in the world.
Yeah,
and he's in some ways at his most loathsome when he's at his most sympathetic too.
Somehow. Oh yeah.
But actually, I mean, a lot of and this is a weird twist, is that a lot of the things that he is saying, if you took just the text, they're not that loathsome. They're not that horrible.
No,
they're actually really, and most of the time, very eloquent on the one hand, and also very kind and understanding and compassionate on the other.
And that's that weird duality that he has. in this movie is that the things that are reprehensible that he says and does are delivered in a very likable way. And the very likable things that he says and does are delivered in this almost monstrous, inhuman manner. With this massive disconnect from humanity. And there are so few actors that I could picture pulling that off that wouldn't be some really bizarre stretch into like septuagenarians that would be way too old to play the part at this point.
Well, there's that one incredible scene where he's sitting there staring at her, just waiting for her to go to sleep so he can take the baby. And in that moment, like prior to that, like his humanity is always sort of at the forefront of his character. At least there's this kind of conflicted mix of like the divine and the human, and like he's simultaneously kind of emotionally present and emotionally absent. And then in that point, it's like he just calcifies and hardens, and he's just gone, and he's just waiting, and his humanity, his compassion, everything is just wiped out. And the way he manages to pull that off, that just totally stern, like empty expression while he's watching her that's remarkable.
Almost like a vulture type of his expression.
Yeah.
That he doesn't even seem human, in that he's just waiting. Right? Just like a vulture.
And the fact that
hungry and it's waiting.
This is
what she realizes too, that he's not what she thought he was. That she's not. That he's not the husband that she thought he was, or the father. And she does not trust him, and she absolutely knows that something is going to happen if she falls asleep, or if she gives the baby to her. She knows it. See it in her face. And that was one of my favorite scenes. It was a long, drawn out scene, but I loved it absolutely. Because you could see it all completely naked. You just knew exactly what was happening.
And for me, the best part of that moment of just raw inhumanity was, this is the moment where he's offering up his son to open the gates of heaven.
Yeah. Well, this is the moment where
that to me is the most priceless part of that, is that this is the darkest hour for the God figure. And it's the most compassionate moment at the same time when you follow the allegory.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
perversely so.
Or nearly every, especially in the last half, every biblical allusion is subverted, right? Every moment that has a sort of positive or transcendental quality in the New Testament is rendered on screen as a moment of depravity and horror. But let's move on, so this isn't a 6-hour podcast, because I want to talk a little bit about So actually, before we talk about anything else, I do want to double back and talk for a little bit about the environmental allegory here. How did you guys feel about that? Like the Mother Earth part of Mother. And Sarah, Rudy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was definitely the idea of this pristine, I guess kind of pristine, but the idea of something being ruined, ruined by basically savages, who come in and just take everything apart and just take things for granted, just ruin shit. I mean, that was flowing throughout the whole part of the first part of the movie, definitely.
Right. And whether they're ruining shit, whether they're destroying or building,
Right.
Because there are moments where they come in and they're painting the house and they think they're doing
exactly.
kindness.
I was
sorry.
just going to mention that where the guy is there.
He's infuriating.
Yeah, I know.
Like, don't touch my stuff. Don't touch my house. Don't touch my husband. Get away. And for me, the first half of the film, I would have divorced God already. Honestly. Like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna be with Satan now. I can't get with you anymore. It was that really was my triggering thing, was the people coming into their private space and doing whatever they wanted, like from leaving the sink in the bathroom running to clogging the toilet. To, and then getting more extreme throughout the film, again with the sink, and where they're like, it's not raised, and they're like, oh, it's fine, and then they break it. I'm like, the whole time I'm like clutching myself because I'm so enraged by these people.
I could never be with anyone who would invite a guest over without asking me first.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I would dump you so hard.
Deal breaker, red flag number 1.
No, but it was so it was so enraging to me that he would do that, and he's like, I don't understand why you're not okay with these people being here and having sex in our room, and and then remember the scene where there are actual strangers trying to have sex in their bed.
Yes.
Like, are you? And they're like, what's the problem? I don't get it. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? And I knew this movie was obviously like fantastical, and this is not a normal scenario, but I'm still just like, my blood pressure.
Well, I mean, for some people it's a normal scenario.
Not my friends. Okay.
Well, not my friends now. My friends in college, on the other hand.
That's why you're not friends anymore.
Exactly.
I mean, no one. I have never invited anyone I know besides like my parents and a few really close friends to even visit my apartment. It would never occur to me to invite someone from work over. Like, oh, come over and. No. I mean, this is my space. Fuck you.
Yeah, exactly.
I have been in my apartment for all of a year and a half, and I think I've had maybe 7 people walk inside that front door.
Hey, that's more than I've had.
So.
And I've lived here for over 2 years.
Yeah.
This is not related to the movie, but once the bottom heating element in my oven burned out, and it's not, this is a rental property. I don't own the oven. And I was faced with a dilemma. Either I inform my landlord and they'd come and they'd replace the bottom heating element in my stove with a new one that they would pay for, or I could purchase a new heating element, figure out how it's supposed to be installed, buy the tools I need to install it, and install it myself. What do you think I did?
I'm gonna go ahead and guess you DIY'd that thing, didn't you?
I did, and I did it just so that I wouldn't have to deal with the possibility of my landlord being in my apartment for like 3 hours while I was here, and having to like have an awkward like moment with my landlord.
Yeah, that's such a weird feeling.
And there was I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I could have easily electrocuted myself or burned the house down, but I did not give a shit. I just, whatever, order it off Amazon and just replace it.
No, I'm going to say also off topic, we've had our landlord come in without acknowledging it. Beforehand, they just came in, and I was here. I guess this was before I got my current job. And they just were like knocked on the door and came in. I'm like, okay, what's up? Like, we need to check your shower. I'm like, no, I don't agree with this, but they did anyway. Huh. No, it's not fun. It is not fun renting. Absolutely. And I've been asleep, and I suddenly heard the shower going. Yeah, it was the landlord checking out our shower.
Oh wow.
Wow.
Just so you know, that's technically illegal.
Well. They would probably dispute it, but I was very
especially if it's in your lease agreement that that they're supposed to give at least 24-hour notice. Then,
that did not
illegal.
happen.
Yeah.
This is New Jersey.
That is New Jersey, true. Yeah.
My landlord is very good about that, which is one of the reasons why I've been in this apartment for over 5 years. They don't. It's always like, okay, do you want us to come in here? We'll be in here in three days from now. We're gonna go and do an inspection.
Yeah.
Is it okay? It's like, yeah, sure. I can make sure it's kind of vaguely clean. But no. Okay. So anyway, back to Mother.
Yes.
But yeah, that home. Once again, back to the home invasion element. That is just point on. Like, that anxiety is so real, and it's so much more honest and relatable than a lot of the shit they put in horror movies. So I don't think I ever answered the question, do I think this is a horror movie? Yes, I do.
I'm the only one who doesn't think it's a horror movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
in a way, I think it is, but predominantly for my preferences for horror, I guess it isn't. But I understand why it is in that category for you guys, definitely. Yeah. But for me, it wasn't scary. It was just very anxiety-inducing.
See, and that's the thing. To me, that actually makes it even more of a horror movie.
I definitely understand that. Definitely.
Because for me, the jump scares mean nothing.
Exactly.
Jump scares mean absolutely nothing to me. It's that momentary adrenaline spike, and then, oh, okay, we're back to this. When you find a movie that can not only induce that fight or flight response, but not give you a moment to recover and continue to build and build and build, and really leaving you with the only recourse of turning the movie off if you want to escape from it.
Yeah.
It builds that claustrophobic, that sense of being trapped, that sense of, oh shit, guys, this is real.
Yeah.
And you can't get that in most modern horror movies.
No,
for the most part, it's that sense of, oh, people are talking, boom, boom, or oh, people are talking, oh shit, there's a serial killer in the mask, people are running, oh shit, he somehow teleported even though he's not a supernatural entity in any way whatsoever. Boom.
No, I mean,
it's all so predictable. It's like being on a roller coaster where you're on a track. You're on a track, where this movie is going, every step of the way. It's a roller coaster or a fun house or a haunted house ride at a theme park or a fair that you've been on before. You know the route, you know what's in there, you know what the scares are going to be. This was walking into a fun house on foot that had multiple paths, and no matter what path you went down, there was something more horrifying than the last thing that you came across, and the only choice you have is to keep going, knowing that you're going to walk yourself into more.
Yeah. But I think we were talking about the Mother Nature allegory.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you guys this. Do you think that worked? Do you buy it?
I think I buy it more on a religious aspect than a nature aspect, honestly. The religious definitely worked more for me, despite being an atheist. What do you guys think?
I think it worked on both levels, personally. Then again, I'm also a pagan with more naturalistic views on what the gods are and what they all represent. And for me, the notion of ecology is a very important thing. That connection to nature. So when you're looking at that and you watch more or less Mother Nature builds up and it fleshes out this living space for humanity, and humanity ultimately just grabbing and clawing and ripping apart all of this creation until the only option is to hit that reset button and just end it all. I think it's a valid allegory for the state that a lot of environmentalists might see the world in right now, of seeing that, well, humanity is ripping this planet apart and polluting the environment. And if we keep going the way we're going to make it unlivable until ultimately a reset button hits, and that's the end of humanity.
I was just going to ask that, actually. Do you think this movie has a relevant message to what we're currently going through? Do you think it's partly about what we're currently going through with global warming and even politics? Do you think it has anything to do with that?
I think that's a secondary element to the movie. I don't know if that was necessarily their primary concern, and I highly doubt that was the primary concern.
I do too.
Well, I don't know. I
do think it could be like with our current climate for the last 2.5 years.
Absolutely.
I mean, people are talking about an apocalypse, which was mentioned in the movie. I mean, I could see that maybe that was part of a message that they were trying to send.
I actually think that environmentalism was sort of on the forefront of Aronofsky's mind when he made this film. I think it's an almost overtly environmentalist movie. And to kind of put this in context, Aronofsky actually tried to square this circle once before. He tried to, his previous film before Mother was also a biblical film with very strong environmental overtones, right? Environmentalist overtones. It was Noah, right? And that movie was a disaster. That movie was an absolute
See, I've
mess.
still yet to see that.
I mean, maybe there's this funny thing about Aronofsky's work where the smaller it is, the better it is. He's really only tried to make two honest to goodness, like blockbuster, or not blockbusters, two honest to goodness large scale epics in his career. One was Noah and the other was The Fountain. And both of them were absolutely disastrous. Just he's just a victim of his own ambition, I guess, in that respect. And then if you look at his smaller movies that focus on just one or two characters or only a few characters, Requiem for a Dream, Black Swan, which is really about two or arguably maybe even just one character, and The Wrestler, which is if I remember correctly, primarily about a father-daughter relationship, which I think is actually probably his best film. These are all, and then Mother. These are all very, in some ways, small and focused in their scale, and they really work. Anyway, so Noah didn't work, but it was the same attempt to take the Bible and to take environmentalism, or to use the Bible or to use biblical material as a container to smuggle in environmental themes. And I think that's what's happening here as well, which is, I mean, if you think about it, the mother figure is the only one that doesn't really have a direct one-to-one biblical parallel, right? Like, Bardem's character is very clearly God. And I believe, Ed Harris is actually called man, and Michelle Pfeiffer is called woman, but they're very clearly Adam and Eve. You've got Cain and Abel, yada, yada. You've got Jesus. But this mother figure that isn't biblical is very clearly a sort of Mother Nature figure. And the entire film is told from her perspective, from the perspective of an Earth that's being like literally raped and pillaged, and there's this deep connection with the home, and like what you were saying, Brandon, I think all of that was very intentional. Question whether or not it works, but Rudy got cut out of that question, so I want to go back to you, Rudy. Do you think that the environmental stuff, the environmentalist stuff works.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do. The first half of the movie, there's really like one thing that kind of got me was the fact there's no electronics or anything really shown about the first half of the movie, and it's just kind of like, oh, well, where's their cell phones, you know?
Well, actually, there is a cell phone that pops up very briefly, and it doesn't work. Remember, Michelle Pfeiffer's character is like, "You don't have service here," and then I think it's the God figure, but it might be Jennifer Lawrence's character. I don't remember, but someone says, "Yeah, that's the way we like it." You know?
Yeah.
Which
and then but then there's the whole aspect of her is like kind of I guess like a carpenter or like a do-it-yourselfer type of. There's that do-it-yourself aspect there too, that really gets shown. But I like the thing I think that makes it work is the way excuse me, the way it goes from being it goes from bad to worse in a way that seems to mirror at least a lot of the environmentalist arguments about pollution and that kind of stuff. Where the first half of the movie is kind of a build up to what happens in the second part, and it goes from like kind of I don't want to say like kind of like an apathetic type of neglect type of thing, where people are just let in that shouldn't have been let in, or things happen, things break that shouldn't have broken because people are there. And then it goes to a very direct, in the second half of the movie, direct like violence, like with the scene where they're beating her and calling her a cunt and stuff like that, like it seems like there's a natural progression there that would make sense for an environmental message. If you're talking about like people who believe that, we're kind of in the, to use a biblical thing, the end times as far as the environmental stage of, things, I guess.
Yeah.
Or at least we're rapidly spiraling out of control, and that really kind of shows in the way it's framed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I agree that it makes its argument persuasively, but I don't fucking buy its framing. I think its framing is bullshit. And here's the thing. Okay, so I 100%, well, I mostly agree with the way that humanity is presented in this film. That, like, there's a pretty much one-to-one correlation there between that and, like, my personal nihilistic feelings towards humanity. Like, yes, humanity fucks shit up. Like, we're innately destructive. And worse, in addition to being innately destructive, we are innately obnoxious. And in fact, it's that obnoxiousness of humanity that I think the film sells even more effectively than humanity's destructiveness. Absolutely. The idea that humans are a nuisance. And that works, and I buy that. But this framing of nature as the aggrieved maternal figure, bullshit. Bullshit. Like, the way the home is presented is this kind of lie, right? Because it's this kind of rustic country estate, which is a really idyllic version of the natural world that you might have if you were a 20th century or 21st century cosmopolitan elite whose idea of like man in the state of nature is like, going leaf peeping or whatever.
That's some leave the grass shit or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Ralph Waldo Emerson bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. Whitman, Emerson, Thoreau, this kind of transcendentalist, fucking back to nature bullshit. I don't buy it though, because I'm a Hobbesian through and through. Man in the state of nature, life is, what is it? It's
Nasty Brutus in short.
Nasty British in short. Thank you. I was
wait.
nasty.
What
I
is
was
Hopsian? Is this like a Hobbit? Lord of the
no,
Rings?
No, it's somebody who believes that Hobbes is real, the tiger, and
Oh, from Calvin and Hobbes? Is that what you're
no. Hobbes was an early political philosopher. He wrote Leviathan, and his argument is, and this is actually like more or like contemporary take on his argument than his actual argument, but basically that man in the state of nature is fucked. Like that without a strong coercive government to brutalize humans and set them straight, they're gonna fuck each other up, and if they don't fuck each other up, a saber-toothed tiger is going to come out of the woods and carry them away. You know, like that's the idea. That's like,
I mean, not wrong.
But I mean, honestly, here's the thing: we would not have developed this combative and somewhat hostile relationship with nature if Mother Nature was the figure that Jennifer Lawrence portrays in this movie.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
We have a combative relationship with nature because nature is fucking trying to murder us at every turn.
But
that's valid.
On another note, humanity has gotten out of control. Let's be honest. There are too many of us.
Yeah.
And because there are too many of us, global warming is happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or climate change.
Let's be honest. Right. There's climate change because there are too many of us. We don't know how to handle each other. And we're all going to die because of that. I mean, really, yeah.
I want to give. I think Rudy's allegedly was just a joke, but I want to give Rudy a chance to engage in some climate change denial here, just for both sides of the argument.
Well, you gotta teach the controversy, right? I mean, that's what we're doing here. But I think, like, one thing that this movie has, one theme of the movie, I guess, is like good creativity versus bad or toxic creativity. And as far as that goes, I think the nature metaphor comes through a lot more because it's like, well, you know, she's responsible for like doing all this stuff in the house. She's responsible for repairing it and, you know, bringing it up to snuff and making it this paradise or whatever it's supposed to be. But you know, her there's like the kind of toxic element of her of God, you know, doing his creativity, you know, where he's basically you know, where it kind of starts to rule him, you know, sort of, it kind of starts to take him over. And then also, you know, the element of his ego involved there. And I guess, you know, to me, that, like, the environmentalist message, even if you don't think it works, like, it definitely, I don't want to say it, well, it definitely fits with it. I think it meshes well with the biblical message. That's all I'm saying. I don't know that I don't really believe it, you know, but it would be hard to sell me on any environmentalist message anyway. So I don't think that. I don't think I'm really necessarily the right person to be sold that type of message necessarily, or the right person to ask about, you know, if this works or not. But I think as far as does it mesh with the rest of the elements going on, I think it does.
Yes, yeah, Rudy, I agree with you. I mean, the three threads that we're talking about in this film, the environmentalist allegory, the biblical allegory, and then the creative allegory are interwoven really well and complement each other really well.
Yeah.
I absolutely
it's a braid. It's a braid, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Everything is woven.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's convincing or not. Like, I don't. It like I said, it'd be really hard to convince me in that direction. So I don't know, and I don't know what you would. I don't know how you would judge whether it works or not. Really, frankly, because like the audience that, you know, is gonna tend towards that kind of stuff, probably already liked this movie a lot to begin with. For the other themes, the biblical and the other, but people who, I mean, this was a polarizing movie, I guess, for critics and stuff like that. So
it was.
Definitely. It was. I think it was critically panned. Honestly, it was very divided.
Well,
it was
no,
mixed.
it's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's not certified fresh, meaning that it's between 60 and 75% or whatever. It's at
like 69, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons why critics might not have been totally receptive to this film. I mean, I think some people may have been turned off by the potential heavy-handedness of the allegory. I think other people may have been turned off just by the fact that this is innately this is an aggressively abrasive film.
Oh yeah.
This is a film that does not want you to enjoy a single minute that you're watching it. And I really appreciate that. And I really like that.
It's a challenging film. It's a very challenging film. It asks a lot of its viewer, and it has so much to unpack in what is relatively a very short amount of time, considering how much content they actually go through in the course of its 2-hour runtime. It's so densely packed and so rapid paced that I can understand where critics may not have gotten it, so to speak, or may not have appreciated it in full.
Or simply may not have enjoyed it. This is a really grueling experience.
It is.
But I think thematically and in terms of evoking exactly the emotions that it wants to evoke, it was a lot more successful than Noah. Which tried to do similar things and just ended up seeming weird and unintentionally humorous. And Rudy, you and I saw that at the theater together, right?
Yep.
And I remember us walking out and just being like, "Well, that was a movie."
It was.
I remember talking to you guys after you went to see it, and the looks on your faces when you were talking about it were just absolutely priceless.
Well, I remember Rudy and I went to see Django Unchained in the theaters, and afterwards we sat in the car for like half an hour before we drove home, just talking about how fucking awesome it was, and like how wasn't that great? Oh my god! And then there was that. It was great. It was great. And after Noah, I don't even remember. I think we were just like, I mean, there were definitely some lulls. I think.
Oh yeah.
But
oh my god, we all need to see a movie together at some point.
That would be incredibly challenging and potentially a lot more awkward and uncomfortable than you think.
It would be brilliant though, because we definitely have some varying points of views.
Oh yeah.
We need one of us to get rich enough to buy out a theater, and just the 5 of us, including AJ, go into a theater and just watch something and just fucking totally Mystery Science Theater the shit out of it.
Oh yeah. I love that.
Except
shall we put out the call right now that AJ, when you're editing this, please take some overtime.
Yeah. I was going to say, if anyone is going to get wealthy enough to do that, it will be AJ.
Oh yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about here?
I want to talk about the sound and really zero in on that, because that was what stood out to me the most the first time watching it, especially in that very claustrophobic, very intense ramping up anxiety of the first and second acts leading into that climactic third act. It wasn't so much those visual jump scare moments of her turning the corner and something she's not expecting being there and just having that jar the audience. But it was the moments of sound that would just suddenly pop and just grab your attention and lock you in. Because for me, I am notoriously bad about putting on a movie and treating it as background noise. You know, putting a movie on and doing like 2 or 3 other things while I'm watching it and not fully absorbing the movie because it doesn't demand enough of me in terms of grasping my attention.
It's a good point, actually, because a lot of movies really don't.
Oh, yeah.
They just present themselves as very subtle. But this
And
kind
you
of
can,
movie,
and you can almost do that popcorn movie thing where you just kind of you're snacking and you're looking at other things.
I can't. I'm hot or cold. I am in or I am aggravated and hateful.
Yeah.
Like either I'm drawn into the movie and it's got 100% of my attention, and if you make a fucking noise, or it's like this movie doesn't have me at all, and all I want to do is heckle it. Like I just can't.
Yeah.
I can't casually watch anything. I can't casually do anything. I'm sick.
You really are. You really are. But we've known that for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this movie demands so much of you, and it doesn't let you look away. Because even if you look away, it finds another way to snag your attention and draw you back to it.
No, if you look away, you have to rewind. I mean,
honestly,
right?
There are so many blink and you miss it moments.
Yes. Yeah, you honestly,
and it's because of that sharp not punctuation, but almost percussive nature of the movie as far as the pacing goes. That quick, kind of feeling of every 15-20 seconds you're getting hit with something else, and the few moments where you do get those lulls in the action, it's almost even more anxiety inducing because you're not being hammered by the stimulus response.
It is. It really is, because you absolutely know when something else is going to happen. When they flash from her saying, "I'm pregnant," to her being like 9 months pregnant, and
everything is so idyllic and peaceful.
Yes.
and you're waiting, and it captures that sensation of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, you can't believe that they went 9 months in their lives, in these characters' lives, with nothing wrong going. But you know what's going to happen any second, and it ends up being absolutely catastrophic.
Oh yeah.
And it's so worth the wait, though.
And especially when you're like me and you are a natural pessimist or a natural nihilist, and you don't believe that anything good can ever truly last. Having a film actually capture the anxiety of that moment of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, I don't know what's going to happen exactly. I know it's going to be awful. Things are going so well. This isn't gonna last.
It can't last. No.
This isn't gonna last. This isn't good. It almost captures that sense of feeling like you can't be happy unless you're miserable. In a really weird way. Yeah. It really locks into so many different aspects of that psychological terror. And that sense of existential dread.
Yes.
Yeah.
And very, very few movies are capable of doing that.
And I think by the time you reach the end of the movie and you realize it is this religious kind of theme, and there's nothing you can do to control it, that's even more anxiety inducing, right?
Oh, yeah.
You realize from the beginning there was nothing she could do. There was nothing anybody could do. It was always going to happen.
Well,
and it's going to repeat itself,
Will it?
Well,
that's the question, right?
How is it going to go the next time? How did it go the time before that? Because it was obviously a different woman the time before that. Yeah. So I'm very curious. That was one of the
was that a different world?
It was. It really
Are
was. It was at least a different person, a different personality, hopefully.
Is it suggesting that that maybe we're not God's first great project?
That's a good point, actually, because really in this, it's recreating the same scenario over and over until it's perfect, which it never is. It will never be perfect.
It's kind of acknowledging, in a sense, it's acknowledging that humanity is a failing experiment.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, you could say this movie is cyclical. Like it opens with it opens with the ending and it ends with the beginning, right?
Yes.
You see a very similar, almost identical sequence at the beginning where the house is burned and then rejuvenated and the mother wakes up. And at the end, the house is burned, rejuvenated, mother wakes up. And you could say, well, okay, I mean that's what the movie is. I mean, free will is an illusion, and the universe is, whether it's in a religious sense or just a purely like physically deterministic sense, is going to just repeat this cycle endlessly. The universe, you'll see the creation of a universe. Everything that happens will happen, is doomed to happen, and then the universe will end, a new universe will be born, and boom, 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 this endlessly deterministic cycle where the mother is always going to, at the end, destroy her own creation or destroy God's creation. I guess it depends. I mean, the degree to which she is a partner in the creation of this world is an interesting one because it's presented more as a question than it is as a certainty.
Well, that's just it. Is she building the world, or is she just functioning on God's direction?
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? So
and there you have the evolution versus the creation. You know, is it evolutionary theory or creationist theory? What, you know, which one is the true answer here?
But so you have that one possibility, which is this kind of, you know, almost like deistic, sort of like a divine watchman kind of thing, where the machine is built and the machine runs, and these poor women who are created only to destroy themselves and the world they inhabit are just going to endlessly repeat this cycle. But there's another possibility, and I think, Sarah, you kind of hinted at this in the I don't know if this was during this conversation or if it was in the pre-podcast conversation, but the idea that maybe she could have made a different choice. And since at the end of the film the mother is a new woman, it's not Jennifer Lawrence anymore, it's a new mother, could that new mother make a different choice? And if that's the case, if she is actually the one, assuming that the humans in this universe don't have the ability to make other choices, which maybe they do or maybe they don't, but if she's the one making the fundamental choice of whether this universe, not whether it's created or not, but whether it's destroyed or not, then maybe there's a chance that one of these mothers, after her baby is devoured in front of her, will, when God says you have to forgive them, will say, oh, I guess. You know? And will that be a
how
moment?
I saw it. I did see it as he's testing different women, different personalities to see who will be the Mary, basically, of this scenario. And she was in this movie. She was not the Virgin Mary. Yeah, maybe the next one was. We really don't know. But when he did say, "Hey, you have to forgive everybody," I totally agree. I think he was looking for the right one to be forgiving, and he was absolutely not. She was enraged, which most of us would be, of course.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's why again this movie evokes so much emotion.
And that's another great point. There is that rage, the rage element. That is such a natural, primal response. And it's one of those responses that it almost invokes as a viewer. It does. It gives you those sensations of just being so angry at this situation that seems not only completely preventable but completely hopeless, and just, it's such a normal response to seeing everything that you've worked on and everything you've created torn apart by these people just trying to grab a piece.
Exactly.
Right.
And then to be asked to forgive, it really it makes you question that part of human nature of what is forgiveness and what is too far to forgive, especially when you factor in things like free will and setting personal boundaries and understanding that certain things are going to be temporary, and how much are you willing to sacrifice to accept reality, as it were. It's
I mean, the movie puts you in a position where you feel like the choice she makes, which, by the way, is the choice to destroy the world, which is the choice to end all life.
I would have done that too, Will.
It feels emotionally like the right choice.
It does. It really does. It feels like it's relating to most mothers, even most fathers. I mean, wouldn't most of us go with that choice if our child was in peril like that?
I have nothing to do with children. I have no desire for children, but fuck, that would be my response.
But the same. I don't want children, but I know if I had one, I would love them to death, and they would come first. It would absolutely. I would murder everybody if someone harmed my child. Absolutely. So
honestly,
I totally understand. They were definitely deliberately trying to evoke those emotions during this movie.
If this was me, though, I would have been ready to burn the house down when he lit up his cigarette. Like, that would be that first scene where he comes in and he lights the cigarette up inside the house. I'd be like, burn it all down. Humanity doesn't deserve to live. That's all it would take for me. You talk about original sin.
I would have been whooping that ass.
Yes. For me, I mean, my moment would have come so much earlier in this film. I probably would have just left God, honestly, my husband or whatever. I would have just totally left him. Yeah. My tolerance is not that high.
If I would have erupted the minute that the man's sons got there.
Oh my God! Right?
I would have been discomforted the moment that he showed up.
Yeah.
I would have been extremely agitated the minute that his wife showed up. But the minute those sons got there, all hell would have broken loose a whole lot quicker.
I would not have made it that long. I would have probably found it in myself to tolerate the first man, but only because of Ed Harris's natural gravitas, right?
Yeah.
Only because he's Ed Harris. I'm like, Ed Harris, you can light up a cigarette in my living room, I guess. But the minute Michelle Pfeiffer at her absolute bitchiness showed up, I would have been loading my shotgun. I was done. I'm done. If I was God, that would have been it for humanity. Nope, you're done.
I'm not gonna lie. One of my notes for this movie was just Michelle Pfeiffer is a bitch. That was literally the third note for this movie. I love Michelle Pfeiffer, by the way. I think she's a brilliant actress. But my God, her character was such a bitch. I would have blown my
casket. And she played the part perfectly.
That would have been it for me. Absolutely. But she was so disrespectful. She was so disrespectful.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, anything else we want to talk about here? Rudy, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Not really.
Sarah, is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I think I've let my rage out quite enough tonight because I've been super angry about this film. I was so angry and anxious throughout the majority of this like 2-hour film, you know, and it really it was actually in a way satisfying to be proven that this actually was worthwhile, you know, of my anxiety. It's totally proved my anxiety true at the end. It wasn't just you know, a false film. So I actually really appreciate it for that fact, even though I can't say I truly enjoyed it, but the feelings were very honest from beginning to end, and I like that because you don't find that very often in a movie.
So, do you guys want to move on to our reviews of the film then?
I think we're about at that point.
Okay. B-boy, Brandon.
All right. Well, I mean, it goes without saying, I chose the movie for a very specific reason, and that is that it is a spectacular film. And I definitely, like I said at the beginning, I needed to redeem myself after last year's travesty. Which I might add, I showed up to take my beating for it.
Fuck you, Brandon. Fuck you. I was sick, okay?
Well, Sarah, you get to pick the next one. So.
But you know, for every single moment, you know, you factor in the ramp up of anxiety, the pitch perfect camera work, the incredible use of sound, the depth of the allegory on so many aspects, and the way that they wove them all together. It's become one of my favorite movies after watching it twice, and that's a very short list that I can say is something that I can really watch again and again. And even knowing where the movie is going now, I don't feel like I've lost any enjoyment in following the story. If anything, I think I'm picking up on things that I missed the first time around. So I would have to give it 6 out of 5 vultures.
Yeah.
You broke the scale, God!
I broke the scale. We're just going to have to burn it all down.
We can't do that. We can't start giving 6 out of 5 vultures because the implication there is that that's like a better film than the films we've given 5 out of 5 vultures to, and it's not. But anyway,
the points are made up and they don't really matter. It's an opinion.
I don't know. I disagree.
These are
He's using your words, Will. Come on.
These are whose line is it anyway, vultures.
I think that the number of vultures and that just the integrity of a rating scale is incredibly important. The sanctity of a rating scale is incredibly important. And I'm sure whatever Rudy is about to say will underscore my point and not totally contradict it.
Yes.
Rudy.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, stay the fuck out of my house. And Jennifer Lawrence was barefoot the whole movie. I mean, I don't know.
She was, right?
Like,
oh god.
So yeah, I give this Aleph Null out of 5 vultures.
A what? Out of 5?
Oh.
Aleph Null.
Oh,
that would
okay.
be that is. It's a mathematical symbol that
I don't
denotes.
know math, Rudy. I don't know math. Okay.
I don't either, but I just I had to Google this actually. So if you want to know what it is, Google it. ALEPH null, as in NULL.
Is that like a null set?
It denotes numbers representing sizes of the infinite set S, the smallest something.
Is it bad that when you first said it, I thought that you said a left knoll?
Yeah, right.
Like hyena people.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't say like the grassy knoll or. Anyway, yeah. I don't know if that's a good score or a bad score because I don't know how I feel about this movie.
Fair enough. Now, Rudy, was it a good thing or a bad thing that Jennifer Lawrence was barefoot?
I don't know. I don't know how I feel about
it. And so Rudy delivers Schrodinger's review.
Yes.
Yep. Sarah.
Oh my god. I give this 2 out of 5 vultures only because I wanted to take medication the entire time I watched this film. Aside from that, I found it very entertaining and nuanced, but very, very anxiety-inducing. But very interesting indeed, definitely. And I've been wanting to watch this since it came out in the theaters last year, actually, but I never got around to it.
Yeah.
So I was got to get an opportunity to really talk about it, actually, and get different opinions.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely a great conversation piece. Like, this is a real good coffee
Yeah,
table.
absolutely. That's one of the other reasons that I wanted to do this one.
So, my opinion of the movie, right now, this is my 4th favorite movie of 2017.
Oh wow!
Wow. Wow.
But I haven't seen Phantom Thread yet, and given my feelings about like, I'll tell you this: There Will Be Blood is one of my all-time favorite movies. So if Phantom Thread is even close to There Will Be Blood,
Yeah.
it's probably getting knocked down to number 5.
Oh my god!
But still, top 5 with your criteria, that's a statement.
Yeah. I mean, it's something. I'm not going to say what the other 4 are because the other 3 are rather, because 2 out of 3 are contenders for movies we might do on a Halloween movie marathon podcast. I will say that because 2 of the other 3 are horror films? Question mark. Anyway, but so with that in mind, I really enjoyed the performances here. As I said, were incredible. I really like the naturalistic way that this is filmed, the fact that it isn't filmed, aside from those jump scares here and there, like a horror movie. It's not CGI heavy. It feels very earthy and natural and real. And that is really important thematically. I really, 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 more than anything else about this movie, and I said this before on the podcast, but I'm going to say it again because it's so important. I really love the fact that this movie does not want you to feel good when you're watching it. I really love the full commitment here to making a movie that's designed to make people feel the worst possible shit. Like, to feel anxious and disturbed and annoyed. Like, movies are just so afraid to make you feel like anxious, but not like, oh, what's going to happen next anxious. Just like, ugh, like awkward. Movies don't like to make you feel awkward unless they're a comedy. Right? Like, the sense of escalating tension in this movie that is in no way like thriller tension, but just like that awful day-to-day tension that that at least I experience constantly when I have to interact with other living, breathing human beings. Like, the full commitment to replicating that on film is great, and I love that. All of that said, the allegorical stuff, while thematically consistent and interwoven, and like we were saying, gets heavy-handed as shit at times. The environmental messaging was a little bit too straightforward and unambiguous. You know how much I hate it when a film gets unambiguous. And there were a few moments where it was just like, okay, we get the point. Let's take a step back and let's just a little bit of subtlety here, please. So with that in mind, 4 out of 5 vultures. Still a very respectable score.
Yeah.
But yeah. Great. So, Sarah, do you know what movie you want to do this year?
I have absolutely no idea, actually. I'm torn between doing a classic and a very modern film. So I'll have to get back to you on that.
I'm actually torn between doing a classic and a modern film too.
Right? Yeah.
And I'm kind of hoping that AJ has already indicated to me that the movie that she would do, if she's going to do one, is the modern film that I would pick, which would free me up to pick the classic. But I don't know if AJ is going to materialize for the podcast this year, so we'll see.
I'll contact her and convince her. I need my
good
girl
luck
power.
with that.
I need girl power. I need my ginger power. Okay, I need my Jerry Halliwell spice, girl. I really do.
So, anyone want to say anything before we close up shop here?
Well, actually, something that you said in your review kind of made me think for a second. Like you said, it focuses on that everyday anxiety. It's kind of a and you're gonna groan when I say this. I know you will. It's almost like being a tourist into human misery.
Oh no. No. Don't do that. You don't put that. It's like when they say the name of the movie in the movie. You're not supposed to do that.
And I'm glad AJ is going to be the one editing this because she'll leave that in.
Oh, she will. We really ragged on her in the last podcast, and I want to see how much of that survives the editing process. But anyway, so I think that's good. I think we're a good 2.5 hours in here probably, so we can
not too bad for a podcast with no non-spoiler section.
Right.
That's true. That's true. So I think we can say fuck it now, right, guys?
Oh, yeah, we can say fuck it.
So hard.
Yeah, fuck it. All right. Who wants to give the final fuck it of the podcast?
Fuck it.
There we go.